dispute that's been many years in the making. It's unfair, it's harmful to both industry and consumers. But during the trade talks that have opened up with the US, we have got agreement now to have a bilateral discussion, in other words, not using the EU negotiators anymore, we're having a bilateral discussion with the US. And the good news I can tell him is we have moved to a new phase, and the Secretary of State for International Trade this week is starting discussions to try and resolve this problem.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I very much welcome the fact that 11,000 or more of my constituents have benefited from the furlough scheme. But COVID is changing our economy, and therefore we also need to focus on creating new sustainable jobs. That's why it's even more important that we press ahead in the south of Scotland with the Borderlands growth deal. And will my right honourable friend agree that we need to get renewed impetus into this deal, and in particular into delivering the Mountain Bike Innovation Centre in Innerleithen?
Well, I'd like to start by thanking my right honourable friend for the invaluable work he did in bringing the Borderlands growth deal to fruition. And I'm also delighted to inform him that the business case for the Mountain Bike Innovation Centre was delivered by the Borderlands Partnership only yesterday. Now, obviously, it has to go to further assessment in the usual way, but, you know, I'm well aware, and I support the initiative because I understand that mountain biking in what's a very beautiful part of Scotland is an incredibly popular sport, and it is locally a very popular initiative.
Heading up to the SNP spokesperson, Murray Black. Murray Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Knowing as we do the negative consequences the delay to the autumn budget will have for the Scottish Parliament passing its budget, can the Minister tell us if he made his Cabinet colleagues and the Chancellor aware of these negative consequences, or was he himself unaware?
Well, we've had one budget this year in March. That was slightly delayed, and at the time, the Finance Secretary in Scotland, Derek Mackay, said that it was going to be disastrous for Scotland and she'd been unable to set her budget, but that was incorrect. She was able to set her budget, and the message goes out as it did then. It goes out now from the Treasury. If you have any problems in setting your budget, then Kate Forbes should come forward and talk to us.
Murray Black.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Just to ask him again, because I didn't hear an answer in there, can the Minister tell us if he made his Cabinet colleagues aware of the negative consequences that would happen, and what was the result of these conversations?
Well, I'd say to the Honourable Lady, I don't agree that there are negative consequences. I have made it quite, the Chancellor and I have had discussions on this matter, and I make it quite clear that if Kate Forbes has any questions in setting her budget, she should come forward and ask us. The offer was made to Derek Mackay when he had similar sort of cry wolf stories back in March when there was a delay then, and no questions were asked, nothing came forward because they had all the information they needed to set their budget.
Douglas Ross.
Much, Mr. Speaker. The Union Connectivity Review announced by the Prime Minister will improve transport infrastructure across the country and bring jobs and investment to Scotland. I assume Scotland's two governments will work together on this for this ambitious programme. So can he outline what response there has been from the Scottish Government so the two governments work together to deliver the jobs and the progress right across the country?
Good question.
So I'd say to my honourable friend that the Union Connectivity Review, which is being led by Sir Peter Hendy, who I met yesterday, is a really important initiative for Scotland and the whole United Kingdom, and it will create very exciting opportunities. However, I am concerned that Transport Scotland have been told by the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Michael Matheson, not to engage with the review. And I would urge Mr Matheson to think again and to ensure his officials take part. It can't be in Scotland's interest for the SNP just to play politics with an issue that is just so important to our economic future.
Up to Perth with Pete Wishart. Pete Wishart.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State says that the job retention scheme is a great example of their union. But according to his boss, the ever-cheerful member for Murray, the Westminster Tories aren't interested in their union anymore. He says the case for separation is being made more effectively in London than in Edinburgh. Is his boss right? Are the Westminster Tories full of defeatism about their union? And if they don't care about their union, why on earth should the Scottish people?
Well, Well, first of all, the new leader of the Scottish Conservatives cares deeply about the union, and that's something we can't say for the Scottish Nationalist Party. But I mean, I go further. He was making the very clear point that it's not that Westminster should not devolve and forget. Huge sums of money and support go to Scotland and other parts of the United Kingdom, and he was just pointing out that departments in Whitehall should stay focused and stay connected and follow up on those funds.
I think we now go to Dave Dugan after that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State and his colleagues are given to chest beating about the tremendous amount of revenue flowing to Scotland to get us through the pandemic. Every penny of it, of course, borrowed. So can the Secretary of State tell me and the people of Scotland, why are those borrowing decisions better made here than they would be by the people of Scotland in Scotland? And why are we habitually browbeaten into being grateful for a service we never asked for?
That's right.
Well, I mean, the simple reason is that not only do we have a strong Bank of England underpinning a strong currency in the pound, we are one country with one currency, and because we have a strong economy, we're able to borrow money at much better rates.
Richard Thompson.
Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 13 and 14 together. I have regular discussions with my ministerial colleagues and Scottish Government ministers on economic and fiscal matters. The Treasury has made an unprecedented upfront guarantee to the devolved administrations, guaranteeing Scotland will receive at least £6.5 billion in additional funding this year on top of their budget 2020 funding.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year's delay to the UK budget saw knock-on delays in the Scottish Government and local government being able to set their own budgets, with the result that many local authorities were forced to separate setting the council tax rate from settling their revenue budgets. Given this year's delay, which has united devolved finance ministers in condemnation across these islands, would the Minister like to take this opportunity to apologise for the further uncertainty and risk that his government is about to inflict on local and national government in Scotland?
Well, firstly, I would repeat the point that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, made, that we've heard this cry wolf story before from the Scottish Government. But the fact of the matter is, and as well as the guaranteed minimum funding for this year, the Chancellor has asked the OBR to provide forecasts next month. And together with the spending review, which will happen this autumn, that will give the Scottish Government plenty of certainty in setting its budgets.
Ready?
Mr. Speaker, I think this is just the disrespect agenda in action. The Tories never really wanted devolution anyway, and now they don't really give us stuff about whether or not it works properly. If they don't think that people in Scotland shouldn't be in control of their finances, why won't they give the Scottish Finance Minister the information that she needs to be able to set the budget properly? And if they won't give her the information that she needs, why not just give her the power to set a budget properly without any recourse to Westminster at all?
Well, a number of points in response to that. Firstly, the Scottish Finance Minister is very welcome to contact me and explain why she's underspent the budget every year since the SNP were in control of the Scottish Government. I've already explained in reply to his honourable friend that there will be plenty of information, and I think that the evidence is in the facts that this year we have guaranteed a minimum spend in addition to the usual budget of £6.5 billion. Only the separatists could call that a small amount of money.
John Lamont.
Mr. Speaker, the Scottish Government's budget has been boosted by £6.5 billion to help deal with the coronavirus, a true mark of the importance of the four nations working together. However, it was revealed last week by the Scottish Government's Finance Secretary that £500 million of that has yet to be allocated. So does the Minister agree with me that the Scottish Government should be prioritising that funding to those people most in need in Scotland just now?
My honourable friend makes a very important point, and it's not just last year. As I said earlier, every single year since the separatists took control of the Scottish Government, they have underspent their budget. And it may come as news to the House, but under the fiscal framework agreement, which was made between the Scottish Government and UK Government, underspends can be transferred between fiscal years.
We have now Shadow Minister Chris Elmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week is Challenge Poverty Week in Scotland. Statistics show that almost a fifth of people in Scotland are living in relative poverty. After 10 years of a UK Conservative government and 13 years of an SNP government in Holyrood, it should bring shame on both parties. Councils are critical to looking after the most vulnerable in society, Mr Speaker, yet they have seen their budgets slashed in recent years. It's not just the Tories that enjoy cutting budgets. The SNP have disproportionately cut local government funding since 2013-14, taking almost £1 billion out of their budgets. Will the Minister press the Chancellor to consider the impact of his economic policies on poverty in Scotland, and while he's at it, in his conversations with Scottish ministers, can he ask them to stop the disproportionality of cutting of local government budgets in Scotland?
I think the honourable gentleman raises an important point, that when we recover from the coronavirus period, we used to coin a phrase, build back better. And to that extent, I've involved the EHRC in Scotland into my regular meetings with business groups and others in Scotland to make sure that all parts of Scotland can flourish once we emerge from this. He's also right to highlight the fact that the centralising separatist government in Scotland does suck powers and money from local authorities in Scotland. And I've met with COSLA and they are deeply concerned about this.
Scotland with Patricia Gibson. Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The UK Government's decision to end the job retention scheme at the end of this month will throw tens of thousands of Scots into unemployment. What effect does the Minister think this will have on poverty levels in my constituency of North Ayrshire and Arran and Scotland as a whole?
Well, what I would say is the job retention scheme was the right intervention at the right time, and it has supported tens of thousands of jobs in Scotland. But across the world, it is right that we move to more targeted measures of support. And the job retention scheme was just one of a whole suite of policies and support that we are putting in place, which will help support Scottish businesses and employees in the months and years to come.
Please, Mr Speaker.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I'll answer questions 18, 20 and 21 together. The Government has always stressed the importance of the Union. The UK is a family of nations which shares social, cultural and economic ties that together make us far safer, more secure and more prosperous. As we have seen throughout the COVID crisis, it is the economic strength of the Union and our commitment to the sharing and pooling of resources that has supported jobs and businesses throughout Scotland.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This Government is committed to its levelling up agenda across the UK as part of its plan to unleash the power of our union. Does my right honourable friend agree that the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is an opportunity for our UK Government to be more ambitious in its pursuit of spreading the benefits of being part of our union, and in the same way that the EU funding has been prominently displayed, the UK Government will do the same?
Yes, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. And not only will the Shared Prosperity Fund help, but under the United Kingdom Internal Market Bill, the UK Government will be in the place of the EU, where the EU previously spent money in Scotland and other parts of the UK. The UK Government will do that, something the SNP have got a serious objection to it. I mean, I think it's just sort of strange ideology from the nationalists that they object to money coming from the Great British Government, but they do quite happily take it from the EU.
19 withdrawn. Alexander Stafford next.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I welcome the launch of the new UK Government Trade Hub in Edinburgh, which will not only strengthen the Union, but also help support Scottish businesses so they can thrive internationally. Does my right honourable friend agree that expanding exports of world-famous Scottish products like Scotch whisky will help give our economy a much-needed boost as we recover from the coronavirus from across the whole of the UK?
Yes, absolutely. I'm pleased that we've announced a DIT hub in the new Queen Elizabeth House in Edinburgh. That will help our exporters in Scotland, and it will build on the excellent trade deal that we have already agreed with Japan.
Gibson.
Darlington is the birthplace of the modern railways. Stronger railway links between Darlington and Scotland will be vital for the success of our internal market. Will my right honourable friend join me in welcoming the Independent Union Connectivity Review led by Sir Peter Hendy, which will look at how we can improve our transport infrastructure in order to bring our communities closer and level up access to jobs and opportunities?
I absolutely do, and That union connectivity review will explore ways to build back better. And as I said, I met Sir Peter Hendy yesterday, and it is extremely disappointing. I'll make this point again, and I think it is worth making again. It's extremely disappointing that Transport Secretary Matheson has instructed his officials not to engage in this review to the detriment of Scotland and her economy.
Crab.
22, sir.
I have regular discussions with my ministerial colleagues, including the Chancellor, on all aspects of the impact of the coronavirus pandemic in Scotland. We have taken substantial action to support the economy from the shock of COVID-19. For example, more than 65,000 businesses in Scotland have benefited from over £2.3 billion of support through government-supported loan schemes.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Productivity rates in Scotland are some of the very best in the UK. So does my honourable friend agree with me that the vital extra support to Scottish companies at this time that he's just talked about, plus the extra £6.5 billion that this UK government has made available to Scottish government, means that Scottish business will be very well placed to help lead a UK-wide recovery?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and just to quantify the support we're giving on a per capita basis, it's around £1,200 extra for each man, woman and child in Scotland to help this. And he's absolutely right, Scottish business is in a good place. I have regular meetings with lots of companies that are putting forward very innovative schemes that we are supporting through the City and Regional Growth Deal package to help us build back better when we emerge from this crisis.
Jamie Stone.
23, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 23 and 24 together. An effective response to COVID-19 does indeed need to be a coordinated response across the UK. On 25th September, the UK Government and the three devolved administrations published a joint statement on our collective approach to responding to COVID-19. We reaffirmed our shared commitment to suppressing the virus to the lowest possible level and keeping it there while we strive to return life to as normal as possible for as many people and businesses as possible.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, I raised this matter with the Secretary of State for Health yesterday because of local concern that people in the south of England were being asked to travel to Inverness for a COVID test. And that is why I am concerned as to the level of cooperation between the two governments. Could I press the Minister further to give me specific examples of cooperation between the two governments?
Minister.
Thank you. I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Like myself, although on a much larger scale, he has a rural constituency. I believe one of the, if not the largest rural constituency. Pooling resources and using the strength of the UK economy enables the UK government to support jobs and businesses, but the decision-making of the devolved administrations and ministers in those administrations on public health has been fully respected. But as an example of UK-funded issues that have been delivered but managed locally by devolved governments, we have the 6 UK-funded drive-through testing facilities, the 4, I believe 5 now, walk-through testing facilities, and up to 22 mobile testing facilities, I believe some of which have been used to effect in his own constituency.
Heading up to Greater Manchester with Andrew Gwynn. Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. COVID-19 has been rising rapidly in many parts of Scotland and indeed across much of the north of England, including my own constituency, leading to the introduction of tighter restrictions. Given the impact that these restrictions are now having on the economy, particularly those hardest hit sectors, will the Minister ask the Chancellor of the Exchequer to revisit his previous refusal to continue the furlough scheme with a sectoral-based approach in those nations and regions of the UK that are worst affected?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As well as the UK Government has provided a host of measures to support tourism and hospitality businesses throughout this crisis. As well as the job retention scheme, which was already extended to the end of October, new measures announced in the Chancellor's Winter's Economic Statement included the new Jobs and Sports scheme, but also the extension of the very welcome reduction in VAT to 5% for hospitality and tourism, the deferral of VAT and other tax payments, and greater flexibility in the paying back of government-backed loans.
I'm asking the question on behalf of Maryland and the substantive Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I will answer questions 25 and 26 together. Both public health and tourism policy is devolved to the Scottish Government. However, myself and my office are in regular discussions with both the UK Government and Scottish Government to identify sectoral issues in Scotland due to lockdown restrictions and coordinated areas of UK-wide support to the sector.
Heading up to the North East with Mary Glindon. Mary Glindon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotland's tourism and hospitality industries have been hammered by the coronavirus restrictions and the impact on international travel. What specific discussions has the Secretary of State had with the Chancellor on providing additional sector-specific support to these industries?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has described earlier the ongoing discussions, not just between this office and the Scottish Government, but also between the Scotland Office and other UK Government departments, including the Treasury, on a wide range of issues, including the impact on the tourism sector. Tourism is one of Scotland's most important industries, and this office and I have spoken regularly with businesses and industry bodies in the last few months, and they have outlined their concerns and also their desire to reopen and to stay open as the best way to stimulate recovery.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotland's drinks industry has been hit hard by US tariffs on Scotch whisky as a result of the US-EU trade dispute. So what discussions has the Secretary of State or the Minister had with the International Trade Secretary on this? And will the Secretary of State use his new position on the Board of Trade to stand up for Scottish industry?
Minister.
Well, the very short answer to that last question is yes, of course. In response to the earlier part of the Honourable Lady's question, I can say from personal experience, having worked as a PPS in the International Trade Department for a while, that the Secretary of State for International Trade is fully committed to getting a deal and removing those tariffs. And as my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, said earlier, those discussions have moved on to another phase in which bilateral discussions outside of the EU negotiation team will be taking place.
We're now coming to questions to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, on behalf of David Damis, who is virtual, I ask the Prime Minister about his engagements. Question 1 to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Let's head to Southend. Sir David Damis.
Next month, a book which I have written called Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster, will be published, part of which covers Brexit. And yes, by inference, everyone will be in the book. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the last general election was not fought on how political parties might handle the coronavirus pandemic, but was categorically about ensuring that the result of the 2016 referendum was implemented in full? Will my right honourable friend confirm that that is what he intends to see happen?
Prime Minister.
I can indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate my right honourable friend on his new book, and I can assure him that this country has not only left the European Union, but on January the 1st we will take back full control of our money, our borders and our laws.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, this is a crucial moment if we're to gain control of the virus. Yet for 8 days, nearly 16,000 positive tests were missed by the government. That means about 48,000 contacts were not traced. As of yesterday, thousands had still not been reached. Does the Prime Minister accept that this very basic mistake has put lives at risk?
Mr. Speaker, this is certainly a problem that we have fixed. The computer glitch error that he refers to has been addressed. All the 16,000 that he refers to have in fact got their positive test results and should be self-isolating. And as soon as we became aware of the missing data, we brought in 800 people to chase up those index cases, and we continue to chase their contacts, Mr. Speaker. And I think it will be for the reassurance of the House and the country that the data points, the missing data points, do not, now that we look at them, change in any way our assessment of the epidemiology, the spread of the disease, and that's why we continue with our package to suppress the virus, not just nationally, but locally and regionally as well.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, this isn't just a technical issue, it's a human issue. And the attempted reassurance by the Prime Minister just doesn't wash. In Greater Manchester, some of the missing cases date back to September the 18th. That's 2.5 weeks ago, with 3 very serious consequences. It's now much harder to contact people after so long, the contacts of the 16,000. Even if they're contacted successfully, for many, the self-isolation period has already expired. And thirdly, important decisions on local restrictions were made using the wrong data. £12 billion has been invested in this system, and yet a basic Excel error brings it down. No wonder it's been described as intergalactic incompetence. So why, at this crucial moment, did it take so long to catch this error and to address it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, you can't have it both ways. You can't call it a human error and a basic Excel error. And let me just remind the House of what and the right honourable gentleman of what I've just said, because the crucial thing is that yes, of course, there has been an error, but the data points that we're looking at do not change the cases that we're looking at. Don't change the basic distribution of the disease. And I think it's very important for people to understand, because that's really what he was, I think, trying to drive at. And although the cases in the country are considerably up across the country this week on last week, the 7-day statistics, Mr. Speaker, show that there are now 497 cases per 100,000 in Liverpool, 522 cases per 100,000 in Manchester, 422 in Newcastle. And the key point, Mr. Speaker, there is that the local regional approach combined with the national measures remains correct, I think, because 2/3 of those admitted into hospital on Sunday were in the North West, the North East and Yorkshire. So that's why I think that approach continues to be correct.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says it doesn't alter the basic distribution, yet thousands of people have been walking around while they should have been self-isolating. It patently has an effect on the basic distribution. If this was an isolated example, I think the British people might understand. But there's a pattern here on care homes, protective equipment, exams, testing. The Prime Minister ignores the warning signs, hurtles towards a car crash, then looks in the rear mirror and says, "What's all that about?" It's quite literally government in hindsight. Today is 100 days, Mr. Speaker, since the first local restrictions were introduced. 20 local areas in England have been under restrictions for 2 months. Prime Minister, in 19 of those 20 areas, the infection rates have gone up. In Rosendale and Hyndburn, they've gone up tenfold. Yet all the Prime Minister has to say is, it's too early to say if restrictions are working. But it's obvious that something's gone wrong here. So what's the Prime Minister going to do about it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as he knows, we're continuing to provide support, £5 billion of support for the North West, North East, for the lockdowns, the extra restrictions that they're experiencing, and we will continue to support all areas across the country that have to go into local measures. Now, 2 weeks ago, I set out that strategy. I said that we would go forward with national measures and such as intensifying the rule of 6, making sure that we enforce the rule of 6. 2 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, he supported it. In fact, I think he went on the Nick Ferrari show saying that, yeah, I support the rule of 6, yes I do. Yet last night, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party abstained on the rule of 6. He asks what we're doing to enforce. He asks what we're doing to enforce local measures. He can't even be bothered to get his own side to support them himself.
Mr. Speaker, for the Prime Minister's benefit, let me take this slowly for him. We support measures to protect health. We want track and trace to work. But the government is messing it up, and it's our duty to point it out. Let's get back to the questions, because these are not trick questions. I've got the figures here, Prime Minister. In Bury, when restrictions were introduced, the infection rate was around 20 per 100,000. Today it's 266. In Burnley, it was 21 per 100,000 when restrictions were introduced. Now it's 434. In Bolton, it was 18 per 100,000. Now it's 255. The Prime Minister really needs to understand that local communities are angry and frustrated. So will he level with the people of Bury, Burnley and Bolton and tell them what does he actually think the problem is here?
Mr. Speaker, the problem is, alas, that the disease continues to spread in the way that I described to the House earlier, and the figures that he gives are no surprise, since they're fundamentally repetitions of what I've already told the House. And what we are doing is a combination of national and local measures, which one week, Mr. Speaker, he comes to this House and supports, and the next week, mysteriously, he decides to whisk his support away, and he cannot even be bothered to mobilise his own benches to support something as fundamental as the rule of 6, which he himself said only 3 weeks ago that he supported. He cannot continue to have it both ways. Does he support the rule of 6? Yes or no?
Yes, but the government. Yes. But if the Prime Minister can't see, and hear local communities when they say the infection rate has gone up tenfold under restrictions, and he doesn't realise that's a problem, then that is part of the problem. Mr. Speaker, there's a further cause of anger. Prime Minister, if you actually listen to the question, we might get on better. There's further cause of anger. Lack of clarity about why particular restrictions have been introduced. For example, in the Prime Minister's own local authority, Hillingdon, today there are 62 cases per 100,000, yet no local restrictions. But in 20 local areas across England, restrictions were imposed when infection rates were much lower. In Kirklees, it was just 29 per 100,000. Local communities, Prime Minister, genuinely don't understand these differences. Can he please explain for them?
Mr. Speaker, I think actually that he's heard from me and heard repeatedly from the government why we're bringing in differentiated local restrictions. I've just given the figures for the North East and North West. I wish I could pretend, Mr. Speaker, that everything was going to be rosy in the Midlands or indeed in London, Mr. Speaker, where, alas, we are also seeing infections rise. And that's why we need a concerted national effort. We need to follow the guidance. We need hands, face, space, get a test if you have symptoms, and obey the rule of 6, Mr. Speaker. And I think it quite extraordinary that the right honourable gentleman has just said that he personally supports the rule of 6 while allowing his entire party to abstain.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister can't explain why an area goes into restriction. He can't explain what the different restrictions are. He can't explain how restrictions end. This is getting ridiculous. Next week, this House will vote on whether to approve the 10 p.m. rule. The Prime Minister knows that there are deeply held views across the country in different ways on this. One question is now screaming out, is there a scientific basis for the 10 p.m. rule? The public deserve to know. Parliament deserves to know. If there is, why doesn't the government do itself a favour and publish it? If not, why doesn't the government review the rule? So will the Prime Minister commit to publishing the scientific basis for the 10 p.m. rule before this House votes on it next Monday?
Mr. Speaker, the basis on which we set out the curtailment of hospitality was the basis on which he accepted it 2 weeks ago, and that is to reduce the spread of the virus, Mr. Speaker, and that is our objective. That's why we introduced the rule of 6, Mr. Speaker, which again he supported only 2 weeks ago, and yet last night they have said, and today they're withdrawing their support for other restrictions. What kind of a signal, Mr. Speaker, does this send to the people of the country about the robustness of the Labour Party and their willingness to enforce the restrictions? Mr. Speaker, that's not new leadership, that's no leadership. And we are taking the tough decisions that are necessary, imposing restrictions, which we don't want to do, Mr. Speaker, but imposing restrictions locally and nationally to fight the virus, to keep young people, keep kids in education, and keep the bulk of our economy moving. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, we are getting on with our agenda, our lifetime skills guarantee, our green industrial revolution, by which we will take this country forward and build back better.
John Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Two of the government's central policies are levelling up and housing. Carlisle and Cumbria needs further infrastructure investment, but it does have the capacity for increased housing development, especially with the Garden Village to the south of Carlisle. The Government therefore has the opportunity to help with both its levelling up agenda for reducing the strain on housing in the south of England. To achieve this, the Government could move parts of government departments out of London to the provinces, but not Manchester and Leeds. Would the Prime Minister therefore let me know when he proposes to move a government department to Carlisle?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've spent at least one very happy night out in Carlisle, and I know it's a wonderful place, and I will certainly look with interest at the honourable gentleman's suggestion. We do have an ambitious programme to disperse, to unite and level up across our country.
We now got to the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week is Challenge Poverty Week, and I'd like to thank all organisations across Scotland and the United Kingdom helping families through the most difficult of times. Their dedication and commitment should inspire every single one of us in the fight to end poverty. With mass unemployment looming, having the right social security measures in place to help families over the long term is vital. Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor has so far refused to commit to make the £20 universal credit uplift permanent. This means that 16 million people face losing an income equivalent of £1,040 overnight. Will the Prime Minister now commit to making the £20 uplift to universal credit permanent?
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the right honourable gentleman, and I welcome his support for universal credit, which this side of the House introduced. I'm proud that we've been able to uprate it in the way that we have, and we will continue to support people across the country with the biggest cash increase in the national living wage this year, and the result of universal credit so far has been that there are 200,000 fewer people in absolute poverty now than there were in 2020. I know that he wasn't perhaps a keen supporter of universal credit when it was introduced, but I welcome his support today.
Returning to Scotland with Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, one of these days the Prime Minister might even consider to ask the question. It was about making the £20 increase permanent. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation have painted a very clear picture for his government. Strip the £20 universal credit away and 700,000 more people, including 300,000 children, could move into poverty. 500,000 more people could end up in severe poverty, more than 50% below the poverty line. The Resolution Foundation have called the £20 uplift a living standards lifeline for millions of families during the pandemic. Challenge Poverty Week is a moment for all of us to take unified action against poverty. The Prime Minister has an opportunity here and now. Will he do the right thing? Will he answer the question? And we make the £20 uplift permanent?
Mr. Speaker, I don't want in any way to underestimate the importance of what the Right Honourable Gentleman is saying. It is vital that we tackle poverty in this country, and that's why this government is so proud of what we did with the national living wage. And what I can tell him on universal credit is that we're putting another £1.7 billion into universal credit by 2023-2024. And if that doesn't give him the answer that he wants, then he can ask again next week. But we will continue to support people, families across this country. And we will continue to spend £95 billion a year in this country on working age welfare. But the best thing we can do for families, for people on universal credit, is to get this virus down, get our economy moving again, and get them back into well-paid, high-skilled jobs. And that's what we're going to do.
Benj.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The review announced by the Prime Minister into transport connections across the Union will be hugely welcome in Wales, where the public want a new M4 relief road, a cut in railway journey times in North Wales, and in Clwyd South, an upgrade to the A483 A5. Does the Prime Minister agree that this review demonstrates his government's commitment to building back better in a strong United Kingdom?
Yeah. Well, I thank my honourable friend who represents that constituency I once fought for. So he represents it well. I don't think I fought for it very well, Mr. Speaker. And the A483 A5 connection that he mentions, I know well, and I know that Sir Peter will certainly be looking at that scheme and many others in his union connectivity review.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is passionate about the union, as am I. And in welcoming the review of connectivity within the union, as the honourable member has just mentioned, would the Prime Minister agree that whilst it is good to consider connectivity across the Irish Sea, it would be devastating to Northern Ireland to have barriers to trade in the Irish Sea? And in the remaining days of the negotiations with the European Union, can I urge the Prime Minister to hold firm and to commit to protecting Northern Ireland's place within the internal market of the United Kingdom by ensuring full and unfettered access for our businesses and businesses who trade in either direction, and for the consumers who benefit from Northern Ireland being an integral part of the United Kingdom?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that the Right Honourable Gentleman is entirely right, and I'm sure his words will have been heard loud and clear with our friends on in Brussels. But just in case they haven't, of course, we have the excellent UK internal market bill to prevent such barriers from arising.
Christian Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is right to be talking about levelling up and building back better, but building back fairer. Can my right honourable friend outline what support is available for towns that haven't received any towns or high street funding in recent tranches, such as Radcliffe and Prestwich in my constituency? And will he join me as part of my campaign to support local shops by congratulating the winner of my independent shop competition, The Only Way is Melt by Tracy in Radcliffe?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can indeed confirm to my honourable friend that in addition to the particular support that he mentions, we're directing another £160 billion of support for business and local authorities and business improvement districts. And I'm more than happy to congratulate The Only Way is Melt by Tracy in Radcliffe.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Across the UK, our universities are struggling to contain the coronavirus, with some 5,000 cases reported in recent weeks. Our communities deserve better and more local and immediate access to testing facilities. But in Leamington, I'm told that Deloitte will not deliver on their testing facility until the end of this month, some 4 weeks after 7,000 students will have arrived back in the town of Leamington. My question is simple. Was the government not expecting students to return to university?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's very important that students should return to university in the way that they have, and I want to thank the overwhelming majority of students for the way that they've complied with the guidance, complied with the regulations, and are doing what they can to suppress it. Clearly, there are particular problems in some parts of the country, which we've discussed at length already, and we will be pursuing the measures that we've outlined to bring them down in those areas, and I hope that he will support them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his statement on the 22nd of September, my right honourable friend said that the Chancellor and the Culture Secretary are working urgently on a support package for sports clubs that rely upon paying spectators. He also recognised the similar difficulties facing the conference and exhibition industry. I agree with his analysis, and that sector is really important in Harrogate and Knaresborough. So could he tell the House when that package will be coming forward, and will it include the conference and exhibition industries?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I totally agree with my honourable friend about the importance of the conference and exhibition industry. It's, I think, worth about £90 billion to this country. It's of massive importance. It was a very difficult decision to take to pause conferences and exhibitions. We want to get them open as fast as possible. We will, of course, they've had a lot of support, as I've indicated earlier. The £190 billion package is there to help businesses of all kinds. But the best way forward, Mr. Speaker, is to get the kind of testing systems that will enable not just conferences and businesses of that kind, but all types, even theatres, to reopen and get back to normality. That's what we're aiming for.
Elmore?
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Chancellor suggested that those who are musicians or work in the creative industries who can't work because of COVID restrictions, and I quote, should find new opportunities. Can the Prime Minister tell the House what jobs the hundreds of thousands of people, including hundreds in my constituency who work in the fastest growing part of our economy, should be doing? Because the answer from the Chancellor of go away, find a new job, you're not our problem, simply isn't good enough for these thousands of people who are truly talented and world-leading within this country.
Mr. Speaker, that is simply not what the Chancellor said. And my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has already provided £1.7 billion of support for the creative culture industries, for sport, and we will ensure, and he's right, by the way, to identify the massive economic value of those industries, and that's why we are supporting them through these tough times, and that's why we're working, get the virus down, get our economy back to normal as fast as we possibly can, and I hope that he will support our strategy.
Let's head up to Chesham with Dame Cheryl Gillen. Dame Cheryl.
Mr. Speaker, building on that, can I welcome the Prime Minister's excellent Conservative Party conference speech yesterday, which outlined his vision of our government's plans for a green economy which will create hundreds of thousands of jobs. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the merits of his green economy proposals extend far beyond energy production and also include the preservation of our green spaces? As the UK prepares to host COP26, will the Prime Minister show the international community the way by committing the UK to championing greater protections for our chalk streams and extend his vision to redesignate the Chilterns Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty as a national park, following Julian Glover's recommendation in the Landscape Review?
Minister.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend. Of course, we are committed to protecting areas such as the Chilterns Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. I understand that DEFRA are actually considering each of the recommendations in Julian Glover's review and following the correct procedure. But I hope my honourable friend will also acknowledge, or I hope she knows, that this government is also leading the way globally in protecting biodiversity, in protecting habitat, in protecting species, and that's what we're going to be doing both in the G7 and in the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow next year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unemployment has already doubled to 8% in my constituency this year. The end of furlough is leading to thousands more job losses in the next 3 weeks, and the Merseyside local lockdown puts 58,000 jobs in what was a booming hospitality sector in the immediate firing line. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that tighter local lockdown restrictions, like those imposed on Merseyside, should trigger automatic government support for local business and support schemes to prevent this economic carnage worsening? And will he commit today to such a targeted support package for Merseyside as a matter of urgency, please?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I share her feelings about the loss of jobs and the potential loss of jobs. It's wretched that we have to do this, and all I can tell her is that we've already allocated 2.6 billion pounds to the northwest, and Knowsley in particular, her constituency, as she knows, has had 12 million pounds. Liverpool another 40 million pounds. But we will continue to provide support across the country to put our arms around jobs and livelihoods in the country as we've done throughout this pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I welcome the Prime Minister's confirmation of the 40 new hospitals this decade, including the Mid and North Hampshire proposal, which will serve many of my constituents in East Hampshire. And does he agree with me that this is also a good opportunity to optimise healthcare provision across the wider area, making full use of our valued community hospitals like Alton Hospital?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. I can confirm to my right honourable friend that we're building a new hospital at Basingstoke and North Hampshire Hospital, major refurbishment at the Royal Hampshire Hospital in Winchester, and we will continue to support Hampshire Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust as they develop their plans, including such local infrastructure as Alton Community Hospital.
Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Restrictions in the North East around opening times and socialising with other households are limiting custom, reducing income and making it uneconomical for many businesses to stay open, including those in my constituency of Blaydon. So what assurance can the Prime Minister give myself and the local authorities that he will provide the necessary finance to mitigate their income and retain the 80,000 people employed in the hospitality and retail sectors? And will he meet local leaders to discuss their request for this support?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she's entirely right to raise the issue of support for hospitality. We'll continue to do in areas that face tougher restrictions. We'll continue to do whatever we can to support, and she'll be familiar with the big package that we've already brought in. But I think that the party opposite does really need to decide whether they're in favour of the plan to reduce transmission, to bear down on the virus, or not. Because if they are, then I'm afraid they must recognise that there will also be consequences of that plan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's new lifetime skills guarantee is hugely welcome. Peterborough already has a new specialist university plan specialising in manufacturing, in technology, science and engineering, thanks in part to the government's funding of a £14.6 million new research superhub in our city centre, bringing back highly paid jobs to our city centre. Does he agree that it's vital to include adult learners in our vision for further education and universities, so that people in working cities like Peterborough have the right skills to succeed?
Yes, I thank my honourable friend, because it is indeed part of our plan to fuel a green economic recovery that we've put £14 million from the Getting Building Fund into Peterborough to accelerate the delivery of a new educational and research facility, and we're also giving Peterborough another £1 million of accelerated payment for investment into capital projects to enable Peterborough to build back better.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government was right to increase universal credit by £20 a week to help families with the extra cost of the pandemic, but at the moment that increase is due to be removed next April. He's declined today to commit to making it permanent, but will he at least agree with me that it would be unthinkable to cut everybody's benefit before the pandemic is over?
Mr. Speaker, of course we keep all these things under constant review, but I'm glad that he too joins the benches opposite in support and approval now for what the government has done with universal credit.
David Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Just 12% of our journalists and our chief execs come from a working class background, and just 6% of our doctors and our barristers do. Does my right honourable friend agree with me we need a renewed focus on social mobility from all institutions so that we make much better use of all of the country's talent?
Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what this government was elected to do in 2019. We were elected on a manifesto not just to build 40 more hospitals, now 48, to put 20,000 more police on our streets, but to unite our country and level up across our country and unleash the potential of the whole of the United Kingdom, and that is what we're going to do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said that it would be easy to build new homes without destroying our green spaces. Now, many constituents in my part of Coventry are concerned that the government is yet again relying on dodgy figures to trample on our green spaces and build unaffordable, low-quality homes in its place. Now, as Coventry is running out of brownfield sites, precisely where does he expect these new homes to be built?
Mr. Speaker, there is abundant brownfield space across the whole of the UK, and I speak as somebody who used to be the planning authority for London, and I know whereof I speak. The opportunity is there. In many cases, the restrictions are caused by cumbersome planning procedures, but they are also caused, Mr. Speaker, by the inability of young people to get the mortgages they want and to buy the homes that they want. And that's why we are bringing forward our fixed rate mortgages for 95% of the value of the property to help young people onto the property ladder. We're going to turn generation rent into generation buy, Mr. Speaker.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I am suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order.
and it was not his discretion whether I could speak or not due to the new rules that don't allow on the day requests. So I want to make sure that that's clear for the record and no slight on your part, my part towards you at all.
I thank the member for that. Thank you. Point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the end of summer, like many other members of this House, I've tabled a series of questions to the Health Secretary on issues that are important to my constituents. Most are now way past the 5 sitting days, and I'm still waiting for a response. A question on the 8th of September about when the Health Secretary has met with families who have lost loved ones during this pandemic. On the 15th of September, about how private sector contracts are letting down people in Luton North who need COVID tests, asking him for data on people trying to get tested in Luton North, asking him to give evidence for the 10 p.m. pub curfew, on targets for this year's flu jabs, on the track and trace app. These are all questions that have been asked in good faith, that I know my constituents are keen to know the answers to. It's our job as MPs to hold this government to account. But getting a straight answer out of the Health Secretary is almost as hard as getting a test at the moment. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, can you please advise how we're supposed to get answers from the Health Secretary to straightforward questions when he won't reply to letters, won't reply to our questions, and when he's in the chamber accuses MPs of using divisive language when we just raise our constituents' concerns?
Can I say, this is on the back of what was said yesterday. I am getting very frustrated, and quite rightly, members of Parliament are getting frustrated by very, very late arrival of answers to questions, and sometimes, and in a lot of cases, people are still waiting for them. It is totally unacceptable. We are the representatives of the electorate. We must get this message through to the government department. Your frustration is shared. That's the worst part of this. This is not an isolated case. So what I would say is that there are other ways, maybe to write to the Procedure Committee to explain your frustration. Because in the end, it is all members, it's not one particular side, and that's the big issue, that people who we represent want the answers. So I would suggest write to the Procedure Committee. But in the end, the responsibility lies with the Department of Health and Social Care. It's for the Secretary of State to ensure his department is more proactive in the answering of letters. So what I understand that he may have a lot of questions placed to him. In the end, bring the extra staff in, but they must be answered. I will ensure that it's taken up with the Leader of the House again, who I also know is as frustrated as your good self and myself. Right, let us move on to the business. We now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Marco Longi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given for me to bring in a bill to establish minimum standards regarding searches and assessment of risks for solicitors and licensed conveyancers acting on behalf of purchasers of residential properties and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, the main aim of this bill is to help protect people who wish to buy a house, sometimes their first home, from being exposed to risks which are currently not sufficiently visible or understood when at the point of purchase. This bill does not propose radical changes to the conveyancing process, nor indeed does it propose changes to the development control system.